Hello and welcome to my Workbench video. I've had this guide done for about a month now, so I thought I'd take you guys on a grand tour. So first things first, this is not a build video. I'm just going to be going over the general layout of the bench, how I decided to build each section. I'll go over the materials and a little bit about how I built it. So I'm going to bring it a little closer and we'll get started. So let's start with the basics. The bench is 60 inches wide by 24 inches deep, and it stands 37 inches tall, which just works for me. Off to the left, we have a front vise on an overhang, and to the right-hand side here, we have a Veritas Inset vise with a row of dog holes. So let's talk more about the front vise. As you can see, I have it mounted on an overhang, and I did that in order to maximize my ability to cross-cut odd-shaped pieces. For example, I was cutting a bowl blank on my bandsaw, and the bandsaw blade broke. Boo! When I was about 3/4 of the way through cutting the round. So to finish the cut, I would just sandwich the bowl blank in my front vise there, with the uncut portion hanging off to the edge, and I was able to easily lop it off with the handsaw. Similarly, I've cut round stuff like PVC or metal or whatever, just hanging off to the left-hand side. Now, if I'm doing a fine cross-cut with a cross-cut saw and a piece of wood, then I'll go ahead and use a bench hook. And using a bench hook makes that overhang unnecessary, but this is my only workbench I have in my whole shop, so basically I need to be maximally flexible for whatever I run into. So down below I have storage. The one thing that my Harbor Freight bench taught me is that I need a lot of space to put stuff. So I built four full slide drawers and a little shelving area. And I still left myself a gap between the top of the cabinet and the bottom of the work surface for my dogs. So that was an important consideration. And also this gap gives me a place to put thin stuff, like this is my sharpening surface, so I can slide it in there as needed. So off to the left here we have the Veritas Inset vise and a row of dogs. These are pretty simple dogs. They're just 3/4 inch oak dowels with the usual little offset cut and the springy bit in the bottom. I got this from a Paul Sellers video, and I put this guy, I used this inset vise as opposed to a complicated custom wagon vise or an end vise, because most of the time when I need to hold a piece of work to the surface, it's for light duty stuff like sanding or maybe some light planing. All my milling work is all done by machine, so I don't have a need for anything super heavy duty in terms of holding work this way. And so far this has been bulletproof. Between the inset vise and these dogs, I mean, I can hold a piece of wood here and I'll move the whole bench before I can pop the wood out. So it's a really effective solution for holding work off to the right. The next feature I'm going to talk about is the plane stop / tool holder. So I had designed the two halves of the bench top to be 1 3/4 inches apart, and that's basically the size of my largest clamp. So if I ever need to clamp something to the front of the vise, I can easily stick that large head down here and then clamp it in front. And the plane stop is actually, this is a couple pieces of scrap dimensional material. I mean, this thing is pretty crappy, but it works great. So it's just a couple of long pieces of scrap with some spacer boards kind of randomly glued in here. And then here are the notches. These things sit on some riser blocks down inside here that allow it to be flush with the surface. And if you move it off to one side, it'll sit on the bottom and be proud. So I made it in plane mode. It sticks up maybe 1/4 inch. I kept it on the minimum side because it really just doesn't need to stick up very high, and that'll allow me to plane pretty thin material. I have used it for that. It works pretty well. But I found the most utility in this divider being a tool holder. I didn't think I'd use it for that at all, but as soon as I had a project where I had a ton of hand tools in the bench, lots of clutter, things everywhere, it was really nice to be able to drop my chisels in here, even my saws, just to keep them out of the way and consuming fewer square inches. So that was a nice side effect. The last piece of the construction are these leveling feet. My basement floor is pretty uneven. From the wall out to the front of the bench here, it slopes down a ½ inch. So I needed a way to get these legs level without the fussiness of a bunch of wooden blocks and shims, which is what I had with my old bench. It's sunk. So I got these things off Amazon. They're 15 bucks or 4. They're super simple to use. You just drill a 3/8 inch hole and then pound in the T-nut. And they work really well. You can get your bench perfectly level without twists, all that good stuff. One word though is that they do introduce a tiny bit of bounce, because the actual foot part here, it has some flex to it. It's just a piece of thin metal with a plastic sort of a bushing inside. So it's not perfect. If you take your rubber mallet and you pound on your leg assembly before you put one of these in, and compare that to with your leveling feet installed, there will be a slight difference. These let it bounce and vibrate just a tiny bit, but really not enough to affect, working on the bench with woodworking. It's fine, and the convenience makes it well worthwhile. Let's go over what this thing's made out of and a little bit about how it's made. So the top is all #1 Southern Yellow Pine from Menards. It's made out of 2x6s. Each section up there is made out of 8 2x6s laminated together. I basically kept it as thick as I could. Like I said before, it's 5 1/4 inches thick. And the legs are made out of Douglas fir, again from Menards, another special order thing. And these are 4x6 beams, which when milled down, turned out to be a little under 3.5 by 5.5. So it has a very simple design. I basically copied it from Bill Shaneher's bench. I'll have a link to that down below. Basically, there's 2 sections, or 2 of these leg units. There's 2 legs, and then there's 2 rails joining them. Again, that's sort of a 2x6 out of that same #1 Southern Yellow Pine. And then there's a long trestle down here, more of that same pine, and then the legs are tendoned up into the tabletop, and then there's a couple of lag bolts going through these top rails here to pull the top down. So I had built this thing when this pine was around 10 or 12% moisture, and I was basically impatient. I knew I should have let it sit a little bit longer, maybe a lot longer, and then lo and behold, it cupped. So when I got these laminated together, I ran through my planer. They were dead square, dead flat. I was very happy with them. Then of course, from 2 to 3 weeks after that, they both cupped. So that really wasn't a big deal. I followed the Chris Schwartz article he published on Popular Woodworking, and I was able to flatten it all down with the 5.5 bench plane. And now, since then, that's about 3 weeks ago, it's developed a little more cup over on one side. So I'm going to let this thing do its thing over the winter, twist and warp and whatever the heck else. And in the spring, I'll take another go at it and flatten it out again. So before I wrap up this video, I'm going to go over the things that I don't like about the bench. #1 thing has to be the size of the front vise that I picked. This is the 10-inch model from Eclipse, and honestly, it's just too big. It's a very nice vise. I mean, it gets the job done, but I'm never going to need to hold anything this big. I mean, that's just ridiculous. And so having this big of a vise, basically what it did is it made this overhang area bigger than it needed to be. The actual width of the vise is 10.5 inches. So had I gone with the 7-inch model, I would have gotten back 3 inches of storage space. I could have moved this leg to the left by 3 inches. Maybe not a huge deal, but it's like every inch counts in this kind of small area. But thankfully, with the thickness of the top, there hasn't been an issue with rigidity on this overhang. It's honestly pretty damn close to being as solid as it is over the lead. So my second regret with the bench is not being patient enough with my materials. I should have let my 2x4 sit around, or 2x6s sit around for at least a month down here in my workshop before throwing it all together. But I was impatient, as most people are, and I paid for it a little bit. Well, that'll do it for this video. Thank you for watching. If anyone has any questions or comments, as always, leave them down below and I'll get back to you. Thanks for watching.